It was supposed to be a temporary setup. My old roommate bailed last minute, right when I was renewing the lease, and with the rent climbing faster than my paycheck could keep up, I had two choices: find a new place, or find someone to split the cost. I didn't have the time or the energy for another move. That's how I ended up living with Caleb. Caleb, my ex's best friend. Yeah, I know, I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. Not since the breakup. Back then, he was just the funny, always working, quiet type who'd tag along when we'd all hang out. A little older than me, soft-spoken, always with a coffee in hand and a laptop under his arm. I remembered thinking he was the least threatening guy in the group. Completely off my radar. So when he answered my desperate Instagram story about needing a roommate, I almost said no. But I was desperate. And he was chill about it. Said he'd just gotten back to the city after finishing a contract in LA and needed something fast. It's temporary, he wrote. Month to month is fine. I'm not trying to complicate your life. I laughed when I read that. If only he knew. The first few days were weird, in a quiet way. We didn't talk much. Caleb worked remotely and kept to himself. I'd pass him in the kitchen or hear the low hum of his conference calls through the thin wall. We'd exchange nods, grunts, the occasional, "Hey, you ate the last of the cereal?" type conversation. But then, slowly, something shifted. One night, I was coming home late from work. I'd had a rough day. My manager was breathing down my neck about a client pitch, and I missed the last train. By the time I got back, I was exhausted, hungry, and fully prepared to face an empty apartment. But Caleb was there, sitting at the kitchen table, hoodie half-zipped, laptop open, with takeout containers spread out like some kind of feast. "I got extra," he said, not looking up. "Didn't know if you were eating." I stared at him. "You ordered for both of us?" he shrugged. "You always come home pissed on Wednesdays." Figured. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sat down. Ate. It wasn't until halfway through the meal that I realized how closely he was watching me. Not in a creepy way, just attentively, like he was studying me. And then he smiled, almost to himself. "What?" I asked, mouth full of noodles. "Nothing," he said. "Just hadn't seen you smile all week." I didn't smile much after that either, not because I wasn't in the mood, but because I was confused. About him. About the way my stomach flipped when he said stuff like that. Things kept getting stranger from there. A week later, I came out of the shower in just a towel, forgetting he was home. I stepped into the hallway and almost collided with him. He froze. I froze. His eyes dropped, then snapped back up. "Sorry," he said, clearing his throat. "Didn't hear the water running." "It's fine," I mumbled, brushing past him. But that moment stuck with me. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about the way his eyes lingered. The tension in his voice. The fact that, technically, he was still my ex's best friend, and yet none of this felt wrong. Just unexpected. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen again, making coffee. Shirtless. And for the first time, I caught myself wondering what would happen if I stopped pretending not to notice. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That morning, when I walked into the kitchen and saw Caleb shirtless, casually sipping his coffee like we hadn't nearly bumped into each other half naked the night before, I told myself it was normal. Roommate stuff. Guys living together. No big deal. Except it was, he looked good. Not in that over-the-top gym addict way. Just lean and defined, in that I run but don't mention it kind of way. His chest had just enough hair to look real, not manicured. His skin was still dewy from the shower. He wasn't trying to be seductive. He was making coffee for God's sake. But I felt like I was watching something I shouldn't. He glanced up and caught me staring. "You want some?" I blinked. "What?" He held up the coffee pot. "Coffee?" "Oh, yeah. Thanks." I sat down at the counter like I hadn't just undressed him with my eyes. He poured 2 mugs and slid one over to me. The casual way he moved, like None of this was strange, made me feel even weirder. I wasn't used to this, living in a constant low hum of attraction and not being able to do a thing about it. "You doing okay?" he asked suddenly, leaning against the counter. "You've been quiet." I forced a laugh. "You've known me for years, I'm always quiet." He didn't smile, just looked at me for a second too long. "Yeah, but it's a different kind of quiet." And there it was again. That way he said things like, he knew more than he should, like he was trying to draw something out of me without saying it outright. I changed the subject fast. "You still working on that big design pitch?" "Yeah," he said, letting it go. "Deadline's next week, my brain's fried." "Want to go out tonight? Get drinks or something?" He raised an eyebrow. "You asking me out?" I felt my ears go hot. "No. I mean, not like, just a drink. You've been staring at screens for days. Figured you could use a break." He smiled, and it was slow, like he knew he was making me squirm. "All right, I'm down." We hit this dive bar around the corner later that night, just the two of us. It was one of those places with sticky tables and overpriced fries, but decent beer. We sat in the back, talking like we used to in college, before life got complicated. I watched the way Caleb leaned back in his chair, the curve of his smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something stupid I said. We talked about everything. Work, roommates from hell, old professors we hated. But I could feel it happening again. That shift, it wasn't what we were saying. It was how we were saying it. The pauses, the eye contact, the way his knee brushed mine under the table and didn't move away. At one point, I looked up and caught him watching me. Not just looking, but watching, like he was searching for a reaction. "What?" I asked, half laughing, half nervous. He didn't answer right away, just took a sip of his drink, set it down, and said, "You really haven't figured it out yet, have you?" I frowned. "Figured what out?" Caleb leaned in slightly, just enough that I could feel his breath when he spoke again. "You think I moved in just because I needed a place?" I felt my stomach drop. "What are you saying?" He didn't look away. "I'm saying, maybe I wanted to be closer to you." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. "I saw the way you looked at me this morning," he said softly. "I saw the way you looked at me last night too." There was a beat of silence so loud it felt like the entire bar had gone quiet, even though music was still playing and people were still laughing. "I thought," I started, but my voice cracked. "You and my ex." He shook his head. "That was years ago. We were never that close. I was just the guy who tagged along." I stared at him, trying to piece together everything I thought I knew, everything I thought he was. Caleb leaned closer, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice dropped into something almost hesitant. "If I'm reading this wrong, just say so, but I don't think I am." He was close enough now that I could see the way his pulse moved at the base of his neck. And I didn't stop him. I didn't lean away. I didn't say no. Instead, I said the one thing that had been burning at the edge of my thoughts for weeks. "I think I've been waiting for you to say that." We didn't kiss that night. I know if this were a movie, that would have been the moment. But no, Caleb just nodded, barely, and leaned back. Whatever was building between us stayed right there, buzzing under the surface like a wire that had been stripped bare. We didn't say much after that. Just finished our drinks, walked home in silence, both of us knowing something had shifted, but neither of us knowing what to do with it. Back at the apartment, I went straight to my room. Closed the door. Locked it. Not because I was scared of him walking in, but because I didn't trust myself to keep the line between us from dissolving if he did. I didn't sleep much. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, heart racing, playing that moment in the bar on repeat. His voice, his eyes, the way he said he moved in to be closer to me. What did that even mean? I kept thinking I was imagining it until the next morning when I walked into the kitchen and found him there, again, with 2 mugs of coffee, one already poured, waiting for me. He didn't say anything at first, just slid the mug across the counter. "Morning," he said, voice even. "Morning," I echoed, taking a sip, hands shaking a little. Then he added, without looking up, "We don't have to make it weird." "I know," I said, even though it already was. He glanced at me then, and the corners of his mouth twitched up. Not quite a smile, but something close. "You hungry?" I wasn't, but I said yes anyway. We made eggs and toast, ate quietly, the kind of domestic calm that would have felt normal if it weren't for the storm of tension still thick in the air. After breakfast, we went about our day like nothing happened. He worked in his room, typing away on his laptop. I had meetings and emails and errands, but every time we passed each other in the hall, something stuck. A glance, a pause, a half smile, like we were both trying to figure out what came next without pushing too far too fast. That night, I stayed out late, met up with a few coworkers for drinks and tried to push it all out of my head. I even flirted with a guy at the bar just to test myself, but it felt hollow, mechanical, like I was performing a role I didn't believe in anymore. I got home close to midnight. The apartment was dark, quiet, but I noticed Caleb's door was still cracked open, light spilling into the hallway. He was awake. I hesitated outside his door for a second, then turned toward my room, but his voice stopped me. "You can come in." I froze. It wasn't a command. It wasn't flirty or daring or weird. It was soft. Just a fact. An invitation, not an expectation. So I stepped in. Caleb was on his bed, hoodie off, just a white t-shirt and sweatpants, sitting cross-legged with his laptop in front of him. "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said quietly. "You didn't." He closed the laptop and set it on the nightstand. "Did you have a good night?" "Not really." He tilted his head. "Something happened?" I shrugged. "Just didn't feel right." There was a long silence between us, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. "I've been thinking about what you said," I admitted, taking a step closer to the edge of the bed. "About moving in, about watching me." Caleb looked up at me then, his expression open but cautious. "Yeah?" I nodded. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know what this is." "It doesn't have to be anything yet," he said, his voice so calm, so assured. "We don't have to label it. I just wanted to be near you. I still do." I felt something tighten in my chest, something warm, scary. "Is this a bad idea?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Caleb looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Probably. But do you want it anyway?" He smiled then, just a little. "Yeah, I do." I didn't say anything else. I just sat down on the bed beside him, close, but not touching. We sat like that for a while, listening to the soft hum of the city outside. His arm brushed mine once. Accidental, maybe. But I didn't move. Neither did he. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But we stayed there, side by side, until sleep started to pull at our eyes and I eventually got up and went back to my room. I didn't lock the door this time. The next few days were a strange kind of calm. We didn't talk about what happened. Not directly, but everything else. How we moved around each other, the way we spoke, the way we looked, shifted just slightly off its usual axis. It was little things. He started pouring 2 coffees without asking. I started leaving my door open when I changed, just a crack. He sat closer on the couch when we watched TV. I didn't move away. It was like we'd silently agreed to walk a line neither of us wanted to name. And maybe that's why, when it finally did happen, it didn't feel sudden. It felt inevitable. It was a Thursday night, one of those unusually cold Chicago evenings in early fall, when you realize too late that shorts were a mistake. Caleb had wrapped himself in a hoodie, hood up, curled on the couch like a blanket burrito while we watched some awful horror movie. I couldn't tell you what the plot was. I wasn't paying attention. I was watching him. His hand rested against his thigh, fingers tapping every few seconds, like he was keeping time with a thought he couldn't say out loud. "You cold?" I asked, just to say something. He nodded. "Freezing." I tossed him the fleece blanket that lived on the armrest. He didn't take it. Instead, he lifted it and draped it across both of us. Now we were under it, together. My leg pressed against his. Our arms touched. He didn't move. Neither did I. "I didn't think you were serious," I said quietly. He looked at me. "About what?" "Wanting to be close to me. Back when you messaged me about moving in. I thought it was just a convenience thing." He shrugged. "It started that way. But then you said yes, and I got here. And it felt good." "It still does," I admitted. His eyes searched mine. "So what are we doing?" I looked down at our hands. So close. Not touching. "I don't know, but you want something?" "Yeah." His fingers moved, slow and deliberate, brushing the back of my hand before sliding between my fingers, lacing them. My heart didn't race. It dropped. Deep, heavy, warm, like something real had finally snapped into place. "I've wanted to do that since college," he murmured. I looked up. "Why didn't you?" He gave me a small, crooked smile. "You were dating his best friend, remember?" "Right." The silence between us was charged now, not awkward. We both leaned in just enough to feel the space between our faces change. I could feel his breath. I could smell the hint of his shampoo. I thought he was going to kiss me. But he didn't. Instead, he asked, "Can I stay in your room tonight?" I blinked. "Just sleep?" He nodded. "Yeah. I don't want to be alone." And I believed him. I nodded, and we stood up together, still holding hands. When we got to my room, I flicked off the light, and we crawled into bed fully clothed, fully aware, fully silent. I lay on my side, facing the wall. A minute later, I felt him shift behind me. Closer. His hand found my side. Tentative, then certain. He didn't grope or pull or press. Just rested there, like that's where it belonged. The warmth of his chest pressed softly against my back, and that's how we fell asleep. Wrapped in something unspoken, something we both knew wouldn't stay quiet for long. The next morning should have been awkward. It wasn't. I woke up to the soft weight of Caleb's arms still around my waist, his breath warm against the back of my neck. For a second, I just lay there, eyes closed, soaking in the stillness. It felt weirdly safe. Like nothing needed to be said, because somehow we already understood. But eventually, reality crept in. Emails to check, calls to return, work to pretend to care about. Caleb stirred when I shifted, his voice still raspy from sleep. "What time is it?" "Almost 8. He groaned, rolled over, and stretched like a cat. "Ugh. You get up, I'll make coffee." He kept his word. 20 minutes later, we were sitting at the table, sipping coffee like nothing was different. Except everything was. I watched him across the table. He was scrolling on his phone, hair still messy from sleep, hoodie unzipped to show the white tank top underneath. And all I could think was, I don't want this to be temporary. But I didn't say it. I wasn't sure I could. Later that day, I got home before him. The apartment was quiet. I changed out of my work clothes, made a sandwich, and collapsed on the couch. I didn't even hear the door open. Just looked up and saw him standing there, bag slung over one shoulder, eyes on me like he'd been thinking about this moment all day. "You look like hell," he said with a grin. "Client meeting. Went sideways." He nodded, kicked off his shoes, and dropped his bag. "Want to not talk about it?" Desperately. He didn't sit on the other side of the couch this time. He sat next to me. Close. Too close. "Want to watch something awful and mind-numbing?" I asked. Caleb smirked. "Only if we can make fun of it the whole time." We did. Some terrible dating show was on, and we spent the next hour ripping it to shreds. Laughing, bumping shoulders, his hand brushing my thigh now and then, like it wasn't a big deal. And then, during a particularly cheesy confession scene on screen, he said it. Not loud, not dramatic. "I like this." I turned to him, heart thudding. "Like what?" "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Us," I swallowed. "Me too." He paused. "So are we going to talk about what this is?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't know, but because I knew exactly what he was asking. "I don't want to mess this up," I said quietly. "Whatever it is." You're not, he said. Unless you stop talking to me now. I smiled at that, because it was such a Caleb way to say something serious without sounding like it. So what do you want it to be? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. I don't know yet, but I want it to be something. I nodded. Yeah, me too. Then, finally, after weeks of brushing shoulders and glances and things left unsaid, he leaned in, slow, careful. His lips touched mine, and it wasn't a fireworks and music kind of moment. It was quiet, steady, like a question I'd already answered. And when we pulled apart, I couldn't stop smiling. He didn't pull away completely, just leaned his forehead against mine and whispered, "Took us long enough." That night, he stayed in my bed again. No space between us this time. No words needed, just us. Finally. For the first time since we moved in together, I didn't wake up alone. Caleb was still there, his arms slung over my waist, legs tangled with mine, his breath slow and even against the back of my neck. I didn't move. I didn't want to. Outside, the city had started waking up. I could hear the usual sounds. Traffic, some guy yelling on the sidewalk, a dog barking down the block. But in our room, it was quiet. Caleb stirred a little and pulled me closer, still half asleep. And for a moment, it felt like this was normal. Like this was something we did every day. Like he was already mine and I didn't need to wonder anymore. But of course, I did. Around 10, we finally got up. He stretched and scratched his head and mumbled something about making eggs. And it was all so easy, so us, that I nearly forgot this wasn't just another regular morning. Except it wasn't. We were sitting at the table, halfway through breakfast, when he said it. Do we tell people? I looked up from my plate. Tell them what? That this is happening. I set my fork down, heart ticking up a notch. I don't know. Do you want to? He shrugged. But it wasn't careless. More like careful. Not shouting it from rooftops. But I'm not trying to hide it either. That part hit me. Because I wasn't used to that. I'd been in something before, quiet, behind closed doors, only for late nights and early exits. The kind of thing that didn't count once the sun came up. But this? Caleb? He wasn't like that. He wasn't trying to keep this in the dark. You okay with that? He asked, watching me too closely. Yeah, I said, a little too quickly. Then again, quieter. Yeah, I think I want that too. He smiled. Nothing big, just soft, real. We didn't define anything. We didn't say we were dating. But that night, we watched another movie curled up under the same blanket, his hand on my thigh like it belonged there. And when I rested my head on his shoulder, he kissed my hair like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that felt like enough. For now. But the next day, it got tested. We were walking back from the store. Groceries balanced between us, both a little sweaty, talking about some stupid podcast he'd made me start listening to when we ran into someone from college. Kyle, the kind of guy who never really graduated from the frat boy mindset. He clapped Caleb on the shoulder like they were old buddies, even though I remembered them barely tolerating each other back in school. Dude, long time, Kyle said, then turned to me. Still roommates, huh? You guys surviving each other? I opened my mouth to answer, but Caleb beat me to it. Barely, he said with a grin. Then, after the briefest pause, he added, but we're figuring it out. Kyle didn't notice anything weird about that. Just laughed, made some comment about drinks sometime, and kept walking. But that moment sat heavy between us for the rest of the walk. When we got back upstairs, I put the bags down and turned to him. What was that? He looked up, confused. What was what? That thing you said. We're figuring it out. He paused. It was the truth. I stared at him. You didn't have to say anything. I didn't say we were together, he said carefully. I just didn't want to lie about us either. Us. That word again. I sat down on the edge of the couch, heart thudding. Caleb came over and crouched in front of me, elbows on his knees. If it's too fast. It's not, I said, cutting him off. It's just new. Yeah, he said quietly, but I like it. I reached for his hand without thinking. Me too. He leaned forward and kissed me, soft, short, like punctuation on a sentence we didn't need to say out loud. And that night, he didn't go back to his room at all. It didn't feel like we were pretending anymore. A week passed like that. Caleb sleeping in my bed more nights than not, brushing his teeth beside me in the mirror, making jokes while I made dinner, holding my hand under the blanket while we watched TV like it was nothing, like we hadn't spent weeks dancing around every touch. But then we hit the part no one really talks about, the weird space between something starting and someone saying it out loud. It happened over nothing. We were making dinner. Well, I was making dinner, and he was mostly distracting me. He leaned against the counter, peeling an orange, and casually asked, "So what would you call this?" I paused with the spatula mid-air. "Call what?" He smirked like I'd walked into it. "Us. This thing we're doing." I turned back to the skillet, pretending the sizzle was more interesting than it was. "I don't know. I thought we weren't labeling it." "I'm not trying to pressure you," he said gently, "but we're basically together. Right?" I stayed quiet, because the truth was, yes, of course. We were acting like a couple, sharing a bed, sharing routines, sharing looks that felt too deep for something undefined. But saying it out loud would mean admitting it was real, and real things could fall apart. I finally turned to him. "Yeah, we are." He gave a small nod like that meant more to him than he was letting on. "Okay." We ate in silence after that, but not a heavy silence. It felt more like something settling, like a drawer finally closing. But the calm didn't last. A few days later, I ran into him, my ex. Of course, it would happen at the worst possible time. Caleb and I were walking out of a coffee shop, hand brushing mine, when I heard my name behind me. I froze before I even turned around. Ryan. He looked the same, too confident, too rehearsed, too good at pretending things never ended messy. "Wow," he said, flashing that easy smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." Caleb stepped back just slightly, giving me space, but I felt the shift in his posture, like he was ready for whatever this was. "Hey," I said, keeping it short. "How've you been?" "Good," Ryan said, then glanced at Caleb. "Didn't realize you two were..." He let it hang in the air like a trap. I didn't answer fast enough. Caleb did. "Yeah, we are," he said simply. Ryan's eyebrows lifted, but he didn't say anything, just smiled again, too sharp now. "Well, good for you." He walked off like he hadn't just dropped a grenade and watched it roll between our feet. I turned to Caleb. I didn't know what to say. "I did," he said, but his voice was tight. We didn't talk about it on the way home. Not in the elevator. Not when the door closed behind us. It wasn't until I dropped the coffee cup on the counter, harder than I meant to, that he said it. "Are you embarrassed?" I looked up, startled. "What?" "You didn't say anything back there. When he asked if we were together." I shook my head. "That's not what that was." "Then what was it?" I didn't have an answer. Because part of me was scared of what that moment had meant. Scared of Ryan's look, of how easily he made me second-guess something that had felt so steady just hours earlier. "I'm not embarrassed," I said finally. "I'm scared." Caleb's shoulders relaxed just a little. "Of me?" "No," I said. "Of this mattering." He walked over, leaned against the counter next to me. "It already does." "I know," I whispered. He reached for my hand and I let him. "I don't care who knows," he said quietly, "but I care if you don't." I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw it. Not the calm, cool guy who always had it together, but someone waiting for a sign he hadn't made a mistake. "I do," I said. "I care, and I'm not going anywhere." The tension broke. Not with words, but with him pressing his forehead against mine, our hands still locked between us. It was the kind of quiet that didn't need fixing. Just feeling. After that night, something shifted between us, not in a big, dramatic way. No confessions screamed in the rain or fights that ended in slammed doors. just a quiet, steady shift, like we'd finally stopped holding our breath. Caleb started introducing me as his boyfriend, casually, like it was always that way, and I let him. At first it felt strange, hearing it out loud, watching people register it, waiting for that weird pause, but it never came. Not with our friends, not with his coworkers, not even with mine. Maybe the world had caught up faster than I thought. Or maybe we just stopped caring. We fell into a rhythm that didn't need defining anymore. He'd leave little notes on the fridge if he went out early. I'd bring home coffee when I knew he had a rough deadline. He started sleeping in my bed full time. The extra room became a half storage space, half study. And some nights when the city was too loud, when the air felt too heavy, when the world felt like too much, he'd just crawl into bed next to me, wrap his arms around my chest and whisper, "You're okay. I've got you." And I believed him. One night, maybe 2 months after that conversation in the kitchen, we were sitting on the fire escape. It was a habit we'd picked up. Late nights with beers and city sounds, our legs dangling over the edge. The kind of silence that felt more honest than most conversations. He bumped my knee with his. "Do you ever think about how weird this started?" "All the time. I mean, me sliding into your DMs like some casual acquaintance, and now I'm practically stealing your blankets every night. You say that like you haven't fully claimed my side of the bed?" He grinned, eyes squinting slightly in the low streetlight glow. "You let me. You make a good heater." We sat there for a moment, the buzz of the city wrapping around us. Then he said, "I used to imagine this, back in college, just you and me, on a night like this." I looked over. "Yeah?" He nodded. "Didn't think it had ever happened though. You were in a relationship. I was figuring my own shit out." I laughed softly. "We really took the scenic route, huh?" Caleb reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers with a quiet certainty that still caught me off guard sometimes. "Worth it, though." I looked at him. Really looked. The way his eyes softened when he was tired. The way his thumb rubbed slow, lazy circles over my knuckle. The way he always meant it when he said things like that. "I'm glad you moved in," I said. "Me too." We didn't say much else that night. Just leaned into each other. The metal railing digging into our backs. The city lights flickering across glass windows. Eventually we climbed back inside, crawled under the covers, legs tangled, breath steady. And as I lay there, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing, I realized something simple but undeniable. This wasn't temporary anymore. This was us. Not just roommates, not just a thing, something real. Something that started in silence and ended with everything I didn't know I'd been waiting for.